Hey guys, welcome to the WWE podcast. We're going to get things going in just a second with Anthony DeMarco as we cover a really interesting topic of what if WWE just outright abolished their B-level pay-per-views and only stuck with the big four. So we're going to get into that right now.
It's time to explore wrestling's past and potential future with your weekly dose of a segment we call What If? Only found here on the WWE podcast.
It's time for another What If show for the week. Anthony DeMarco joins me. We're going to talk this week about not a single person or a single event, but rather an overarching concept of what would be, what if WWE were to abolish B-level pay-per-views. Very interesting concept, very interesting thought to ponder. We're going to do that tonight. Anthony, how you doing?
Doing well, man. And this really came to my brain last night watching Extreme Rules. So I guess that kind of tells you what I thought about the pay-per-view as a whole. But I guess before you really get going, let's establish what pay-per-views are. So let's say everything aside from the big four. And I guess we could count Money in the Bank as an A-level pay-per-view now.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want to do up front, too, is just like, how do we define what a B-level pay-per-view is? I mean, right. Like initially I'm thinking, yeah, you could do Survivor Series, Rumble, Mania, and SummerSlam. Like, that's normally the big four that come to mind. But like you said, yeah, I mean, Money in the Bank is starting to creep up there. It's like a B-plus pay-per-view. So, I mean, I would, boy, only doing 4 pay-per-views a year, WWE would die.
Yeah.
I mean, right off the bat. But yeah, I mean, if we're going to define Money in the Bank as a not necessarily a B-level pay-per-view, I mean, there's a case to be made that it's not, but let's stick with 4. I mean, I think most people define the big 4 as SummerSlam, Survivor Series, WrestleMania, and the Rumble. How the hell would WWE survive? Could they survive? I mean, we're going to answer those questions. But so, yeah, are you good if we just define those big 4 as the A's and the rest are B's in terms of just how people view the pay-per-views? Because then you could start making a case for Crown Jewel because they had some massive matches there and they treat it like WrestleMania overseas. So, I mean, you start going down a slippery slope and then all of a sudden nothing's a B pay-per-view. So, you good with that definition?
Yeah, I think it makes it easier because, like you said, you could even be like, oh, well, what about Money in the Bank? That's a big level match. So, yeah, I'm 100% good with the big 4 being the ones described as A-level pay-per-views. All
right. Yeah, let's do it then. And this, guys, I just want to preface this by saying I do not believe that this will ever happen ever. Like, I mean, I don't think it'll happen. I think that WWE is way too locked into this format, this pay-per-view format, and they live and die by the pay-per-views. And I think that creative would gouge their eyes out if they had to build a program to, only once a quarter, essentially every 3 months they'd get a pay-per-view. But of course, there are solutions in between. You don't have to have a program being built for 3 months. You can treat certain Raws and certain SmackDowns like a pay-per-view. I mean, the hell, they do that now. They're having 3 championship matches on Monday Night Raw, for God's sakes, which is another conversation of fury for me. But I think that you don't have to have a 3-month build just because there's only a pay-per-view once a quarter. I mean, AEW doesn't have it as frequently as WWE does. So, yeah, give me your overall thoughts.
I think that for them to survive, that's like the question, right? Like, how would they survive only doing 4 pay-per-views a year?
Yeah. Like, do you think as a concept they could do it? I mean, granted, you and I don't believe it ever will happen, but as this what if game goes, how do you think they could survive creatively with only 4 pay-per-views a year?
I think they would probably just do what they're doing now, right? Just Universal Championship match here and WWE Championship match there. Like, the reason I first thought of this last night is because in the middle of the pay-per-view, they scheduled the WWE Championship match for tonight on Raw between Big E and Bobby Lashley, and instead had a 6-man tag team match on a pay-per-view. And I remember thinking to myself, like, well, then why the hell am I watching this on Sunday night if I can just see a bigger match tomorrow night, at least for the Raw side of things? So I think that in a lot of ways, they would just continue booking as the way they are now. And I think from a monetary perspective, and I believe you touched on this on your mailbag last week, they don't even really necessarily make more money for pay-per-views anymore because they sold all the rights to Peacock. So for them, it's like there's not even an incentive, easy enough for me to say, to make pay-per-views feel all that more special anymore because they've been paid up front, as opposed to on Raw and on SmackDowns, they're still vying for ratings. And I think that's why we're seeing more and more and more championship matches, and matches, let's say 5 to 10 years ago, we would have thought were for sure slam dunk main events for pay-per-views being showcased on network television. So to answer your question, I think that if they went down this road, the answer would be simple. Just keep booking championship matches on Monday Night Raw and SmackDown, and then save the mega matches, let's say for Survivor Series and Rumble and Mania and SummerSlam, for 4 times a year. Because at this rate, you can get a match on Monday Night Raw that you would have gotten 5 years ago on, let's say, Backlash or something.
Yeah, exactly. This is actually conceptually not that hard to do. Again, it's hard for WWE to process this. They would, I don't think, ever do it. But you would look at this and say, and to your point about Peacock, and they'd say, oh man, well, what about the pay-per-view buys, right? like the WWE is going to miss out on all this revenue from the pay-per-view buys. But yeah, they've been paid up front. Peacock is number one. They're terrible in the last couple of pay-per-views. They have had some massive technical issues, and they are just god awful. Avoid Peacock at all costs for WWE. I will say that. And stick with the WWE network if you still have it, or just scramble your IP address and access it remotely. That said, I just think that, yeah, there's an argument to be made where the monetary incentive isn't there for WWE to do it, because the pay-per-view buys, yeah, there's probably a handful of people that do it, but it's not even worth a fraction of 1% of their revenue for the year of people that buy pay-per-views. It is such an antiquated process that it's not even worth really discussing from a monetary perspective. But you could say, well, what about the ticket sales, right? The ticket sales for the pay-per-views that they'd be missing. Well, where are they going for these pay-per-views, and how many more tickets would they sell if they just did a Monday Night Raw or a SmackDown versus a pay-per-view in that arena? Because they're already doing stadiums for WrestleMania, now for SummerSlam. They did it for the Royal Rumble this past year, I believe. They did that with Edge in his return. I remember it was a massive arena. If not, was it a stadium in Edge's return? I remember it was. Yeah. So they've already converted outside of Survivor Series, but that's easy to convert one more, to a stadium setting. So for the other 8 pay-per-views that we're eliminating from the schedule for the year, are they really missing out on that many more ticket sales from doing a pay-per-view someplace to just doing a regular Monday Night Raw or SmackDown Live? I don't think they are. There really is no monetary incentive to do this. So if we're talking right now about money, do you see any reason that WWE should continue this 12-month or 12 pay-per-views a year schedule? I mean, plus they got to travel there. I mean, like they got to come up with more merchandise or more marketing tools. They got to rebrand their ring apron, come up with a new set, carry that set to the show. Like there's expenses that go into building new sets and coming up with logos and things like that they wouldn't have to deal with if it was only 4 times a year.
Exactly. And I think that the only monetary incentive right now would be the gate revenue, right, from the arenas, but that would just cover all the costs that you just outlined. And at that point, what is the point? And you're also requiring talent to work another night in an already hectic and demanding schedule. I just think personally, it's getting to the point now where pay-per-views just don't feel special. And I remember, let's say, a B-Level pay-per-view 13 years ago, or even more so than that, 19 years ago, No Way Out 2003 in Montreal, Quebec, when Austin returned. Yeah. And in my mind, I remember thinking to myself, this could be like a poor WrestleMania card. It could have. Or like you would watch a No Mercy and it would be Taker versus Brock in a Hell in a Cell, or what have you, just random pay-per-views, or Armageddon 2003. Evolution's Night of Shine when they all walked out as champions. And I remember getting so hyped for just the average pay-per-view. And now you tune into Extreme Rules, and yeah, the main event was decent except for maybe the ending and whatnot. But I'm just like, that 6-man tag team match to open the show, that's a match that somewhere down the line you're going to get on Monday Night Raw, or at least close to it. You know that you're going to see at least another 2 to 3 United States Championship matches on Monday Night Raw between now and probably Crown Jewel or Survivor Series. Ditto for the IC title over on SmackDown. And even at that, they had the IC Championship match on SmackDown instead of the pay-per-view. So I think at this point, you're almost just diluting the value of pay-per-views when you hold pay-per-views like Extreme Rules or like a Backlash or TLC or even an Elimination Chamber. I just think that at this point they're hurting themselves more because they're making it not feel valuable and not important. And by extension, you're making people feel that way about the big 4 pay-per-views. And now for hardcore fans like you and myself and many of the people who listen to this show, we know there's a big difference between how WWE will prepare for Extreme Rules and Survivor Series or TLC and Mania. But for the casual fan who tunes into a quote-unquote pay-per-view and they see just a bunch of, lackluster matches to be put on a pay-per-view type of platform, they're going to be like, well, why would I tune in for any other pay-per-view, including Mania, including SummerSlam, including Rumble? So I think because there is no monetary incentive for them right now, I don't see why they're continuing down this path as is.
I don't, outside of habit, outside of they feel like storylines get reset at pay-per-views, and sometimes they do, sometimes they begin at pay-per-views. It depends on where they're at creatively. But again, you could still have storylines run for a month or 2 months, and if a pay-per-view doesn't happen for another 6 weeks, you could still do a big, like a super show, where it's a pay-per-view without being a pay-per-view, and settle the feud there and make those shows feel really important. And I think it would up the value of those 4 pay-per-views even further. And I just don't see the value in also bringing back gimmick pay-per-views. You and I went over this I don't know how many times about a Hell in a Cell is just built into the schedule. TLC is built into the schedule. They take match stipulations and make them the names of pay-per-views, which I don't like, because to me the program should be and how hot the feud is should be the deciding factor in what the stipulation is, not just because it's part of the WWE schedule that people need to abide by the name of the pay-per-view. It's completely ass backwards. So, I mean, that's a little bit off topic, but I think that if you take 4 pay-per-views a year, it automatically creates more value for those pay-per-views, as if they needed any more, but it would heighten them even more. And like you said, championship matches do not feel special anymore, even if it's on a pay-per-view, because like you said, you can go on any SmackDown now, any Monday Night Raw, and you're going to see championship matches, if not multiple championship matches, and they've done championship match or championship changes. It's not like they're threatening with, Bobby Lashley is going to put his WWE title on the line, and you're thinking, yeah, well, he's not going to lose it. They have no shame now. I mean, they will change the championship even on free TV, and they think that it's some kind of ratings bump, that it's going to just, propel them into that next category or win the male 18 to 49 demographic. It seems desperate to me. It screams desperation when they do this. And they've been guilty of it over the last many years, of slowly starting to integrate championship matches on free TV. And I've been a big anti-proponent of it, really against it. And now it's just almost becoming comical of how many championship matches they give away every single week. It's rare that we have a show, Raw or SmackDown, that doesn't have a championship match, which by extension dilutes not only the championship value, because you're seeing it all the time, but it really just dilutes the interest in the upcoming pay-per-view, because you're like, well, who cares, because I'll just tune in on Monday and they'll probably have a rematch. It is so short-term thinking, when they should be looking at this long term and realizing how this is affecting the value of the championships and the importance of pay-per-views. But they're not thinking that way. They're looking at kind of hot shot booking and whatever we need in the moment. Who cares about what this does long term to the value of the belts and the pay-per-views?
Well, how ass backwards does it feel that last night on a pay-per-view, you had the WWE champion, theoretically the most popular belt in the company and most prestigious belt in the company, featured in a 6-man tag team match to open the card, and then tonight he's defending the championship on Monday Night Raw. It just makes no sense. In my head, I was saying, well, damn, if I had to pick one or the other, I would probably watch Monday Night Raw because it has the WWE Championship. And you should never, ever, ever feel that way. Like when I was a younger kid, okay, and I would fight with my mom to say if I could stay up to watch Raw or stay up to watch SmackDown, more times than not, I would lose that battle. But I would pick my battles because I knew I wanted to watch the pay-per-views. And more times than not, because it was a pay-per-view, my mom would be like, okay, fine, once a month on Sundays, you can stay up and watch pay-per-views and you can shut up and leave me alone. But that was because I knew that No Way Out was more important than all the SmackDown and Raws combined for that month. And the same thing for Backlash and the same thing for Judgment Day and so on and so forth. As opposed to right now, if I was in the same predicament, obviously not as a 27-year-old, but if I was still 7 years old like I was 20 years ago, I would probably be like, well, I won't campaign to stay up late on a Sunday night. I'll just do it for Mondays and Fridays. Well, at that point, it used to be Thursdays for SmackDown. I'll just campaign for weekdays because they feel more special. And that just doesn't make sense to me. Like, I cannot believe that we've come to a point where pay-per-views play second fiddle almost to Raw and SmackDowns. And I truly think that that's what it is at this point. Unless it's a Rumble or Survivor Series or Mania or SummerSlam, WWE cares more about Raw and SmackDown than they do about their pay-per-views. And it probably is predominantly because of them already being paid up front by Peacock for all the rights to these pay-per-views and the WWE Network. But another thing is, and I could speak to myself, but do you think that for a lot of people, they subscribe to the WWE Network, and if you're in the States, to Peacock, for all the other content aside from the pay-per-views, like more the original series and the archives and whatnot?
Yeah, that's a good point to bring up, because I know when I first signed up, and I think they started it in 2014. I believe that's when the network went live, right before WrestleMania 30. And I was like, oh my God, I don't have to spend $60 for a pay-per-view every month or whatever it was. I can just spend $10 a month and get every pay-per-view every month. And to me, that was the driving factor at that time. Like, whoa, okay, I'm in it for the pay-per-views. Whatever else is on there, it's bonus to me. And now it seems to, at least from the people I've talked to and in my own brain, for what that's worth, it's not so much the pay-per-views, but I want to watch Broken Skull sessions, right? I want to watch the 24/7 the specials that they do on people. I want to watch the backstage stuff, the Undertaker Last Ride documentary, which was one of the best documentaries I've ever seen, wrestling or not. I mean, yes, the other content to me has taken the driver's seat for why I am continuing to subscribe to Peacock, outside of the fact that I do this podcast and I have to be subscribed to the network, or Peacock in this case. So yeah, to me, I think if you talk to most fans, they aren't in it necessarily for the pay-per-views outside of, well, we want to watch WrestleMania. Again, outside of the big four, you're going to probably hear people talk about all the specials that are on there, or maybe going back to watch legacy content and the good old days of watching Monday Night Raw in the Attitude Era, like all the older pay-per-views and all the archived content, I think, is now the primary motivator for people to subscribe rather than the pay-per-views, because people realize that the pay-per-views right now are simply just extensions of Monday Night Raw and SmackDown. They don't have anything on a pay-per-view that they wouldn't put on SmackDown. Name one thing that they have done on a pay-per-view that they would not have done on free TV over the last several years. I mean, I can't. That's sad.
And I've said this for a while, but I think that WWE's best content right now, and I'm talking about content that they spit out in the here and now, present content, is documentaries about their product from 15 to 20 years ago. And I think that's why most people want to watch the network. Like when I have buddies come over who don't have the network, they could give a damn about the latest Extreme Rules or Backlash or even at times Survivor Series or SummerSlam. They say, oh, yo, let's go back to Judgment Day 2005 and watch JBL versus Eddie Guerrero's Bloodbath. Or let's go back to Survivor Series 2002 and watch the first ever Elimination Chamber. Or let's go back to the Great American Bash in X year and watch this. And that's because these quote unquote B-level pay-per-views used to feel special. And nowadays it's because WWE probably knows that their best content is documentaries about the good old days, for lack of better terms. And look, they still pull out all the stops for SummerSlam and for Rumble and for Mania, to a lesser extent Survivor Series, but even there as well, even though it's become pretty much bragging rights, a glorified bragging rights. But it's just sad that you know that you're never going to get, let's say, Armageddon just knocked out of the park. And I think in large part it's because a lot of those old B-level pay-per-views have become gimmick pay-per-views. Like No Way Out is now Elimination Chamber. Armageddon is now TLC. You have, let's say, No Mercy is now Extreme Rules, and then Great American Bash is now Hell in a Cell. And I think it's because they're so predetermined and it feels almost scripted and forced, even though we all know it is. You like to suspend that disbelief. I think that's why B-level pay-per-views have started to come downwards, even before the sale to Peacock and even before there was no more monetary gain for WWE. So do you think that them making so many gimmick pay-per-views has also helped in this decline?
Oh, yeah, and I don't think... Again, when you take a gimmick and just make it a part of the schedule, at first people are going to be like, cool, we get to see Hell in a Cell every year. We get to see Elimination Chamber every year. We get to see Extreme Rules every year. Yet only one match last night, by the way, was Extreme Rules, which is kind of hilarious. Everything else was just normal rules.
Yeah, I know.
You know, so it's and then that's just an offshoot of ECW is really all that pay-per-view is, and yet they had one match, that was no rules. Anyway, when you take all of those and you put them together, TLC, yeah, like all of those are stipulation matches, and you just make it a part of the schedule, people become numb to it. They not only are looking at this, at least some fans, and thinking, well, wait a minute, is this program deserving of this stipulation? Or rather, it's just being forced on us as a marketing gimmick that we're supposed to be more interested in the pay-per-view because of the stipulation. To me, that's a superficial reason that fans should care, is the stipulation. The stipulation, again, is not driven by a calendar. It should be driven by the rivalry and what's going on in that rivalry. But since they don't have the confidence to create rivalries that they feel would be deserving, or fans would feel would be deserving of the stipulations they put into place with TLC, Extreme Rules, Hell in a Cell, and so on, they rely on, well, we'll throw it in the schedule, right? We don't have to worry about building a feud that would then warrant those stipulations because we don't want to have to do that. It's laziness and it's incompetence, and to me, it is the complete wrong way. If I could design a wrong way to do pay-per-views, that would be the way to do it. It screams marketing, gimmicky, let's force these stipulations on the whatever the hell happens to be going on. It is the exact wrong way to do wrestling, and I think it has contributed in the decline of B pay-per-views. Well, I don't even know if it's the primary factor, but it's certainly, I think, in the top 5 reasons that B pay-per-views are looked down upon. But at the same time, B pay-per-views have given us massive main events. I mean, the first time John Cena and Roman Reigns met at No Mercy in 2017, it was on, again, No Mercy. It was a B pay-per-view. I mean, you had B pay-per-views put out, potentially even WrestleMania main event worthy matches. Like, so they don't even really care so much that these B pay-per-views are putting out headline matches that maybe don't belong on a B pay-per-view. They just look at it as just another pay-per-view, and what gimmick can we put in it this time? Yeah. So long answer short, I think it has contributed. I don't think it's number one. There's many other reasons for it, but it's certainly top 5.
Well, that's the other thing, is that B pay-per-views have a long legacy of featuring historic matches. Like, we forget, but Eddie Guerrero's only championship victory came at No Way Out in 2004, or Rock Hogan 2, No Way Out 2003. Like, I just find it a shame that you can't tune in to these B-level pay-per-views and expect something amazing anymore, because you know that nothing's going to come really of it because of all the reasons you just outlined, because it's so contrived, because it's so gimmicky, because it's so forced in a lot of ways. And now that I'm thinking of it, is the only non-gimmick B pay-per-view now? Yeah, I think it's Backlash.
Yeah.
Is that the only one?
No, it's not Backlash. That's the wrong name. It is WrestleMania Backlash.
True.
Yeah. No, we got to make sure we know what kind of backlash we're looking at. But that's a great point that I was going to bring up too, but that you did it first. Is when I look outside of those four, you take Rumble out, you take Mania, you take Survivor Series and SummerSlam, and they're out the window. Okay, you got your list of B pay-per-views left. Give me one that's not a gimmick name in there. I mean, okay, Fastlane is one. I have the list in front of me. This is the only reason I know. Fastlane, okay, fine. That's right before WrestleMania. It's the final stop, as they say. Backlash, WrestleMania Backlash is 2. You have Crown Jewel. So you have 3. You have 3 out of the remaining 8 that are not gimmick-related names for the B-level pay-per-views.
That's, oh my God.
I didn't even realize it. Yeah.
Well, just off the top of my head, back in, let's say, 15 to 16 years ago, you had No Way Out, Backlash, Judgment Day, Great American Bash, Unforgiven, No Mercy, and Armageddon.
Oh, such good names. Yeah.
Those were all 7. And yeah, that's another thing. The names.
Yeah.
The names were so great and they meant something. Like, I know, like, did they not change, like, Armageddon to Vengeance one year after 9/11 or something?
Yeah, they did.
And I could understand that, but even Vengeance, like, that's such a badass name. And, you know, I just remember there's been so many historic matches at old pay-per-views. Like, even The Rock's WWE Championship victory against Undertaker and Kurt Angle at Vengeance 2002. Or even, like, did you like it when these B-level pay-per-views became brand exclusive?
At the time, it's funny. I mean, I looked at wrestling much different. Now I look at it through a much more analytical lens with what I do. But, you know, back then, at first I was like, oh, I was accepting of it, but I knew that the star power would immediately be cut in half. And I figured that this wouldn't last long because they are slicing in half of what they could do with the star power. I mean, I don't feel strongly one way or the other, but I would say if I was WWE, I probably wouldn't have done that in retrospect because of the fact that you're handicapping yourself by relying on half of the roster.
You know, I see that point, but I really liked it. And they even revisited that when they did the brand split in 2016. And I think they kept it just about for a year and a half. And you know what? I felt that the pay-per-views meant more. Like, I believe I think it was Unforgiven. Or no, I think it was Backlash. It was when AJ Styles defeated Dean Ambrose for the WWE Championship. It was the first brand exclusive pay-per-view in the new era of the brand split. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, man, this pay-per-view felt so damn important. And I guess it was just because it wasn't diluted. It felt like all the biggest matches from that show culminated after a month or two because it wasn't brand neutral at this point. You'd wait longer for big matches on respective brands. It would just feel that much more important because you weren't seeing Dean Ambrose defend the WWE Championship every single SmackDown leading up, or even the Intercontinental Championship when Miz had it and him and Dolph Ziggler were feuding over the title. I just feel like, yes, it is a double-edged sword because you are cutting your star power in half, but it almost forces you to long-term book and save your best matches for pay-per-view worthy platforms, if you know what I'm saying.
It does, and you know, it does also split the brands even further. It creates that divisive line and puts a hard, I guess, wall up and like, nope, this is this brand. They have brand exclusive pay-per-views. This brand has this pay-per-view. I think that though, when you have a brand exclusive pay-per-view. But if I'm not mistaken, they did it where, say, Raw would have a January pay-per-view and SmackDown would have a February pay-per-view, right? They didn't have, or did they do it where they had 2 pay-per-views per month? What was that? I forget what they did.
I think that back in the day, and I'm talking Ruthless Aggression, it was like, let's say SmackDown would have February, then WrestleMania would be in March, and then Raw would have Backlash in April. Okay. And then SmackDown would have Judgment Day, and then so on and so forth.
Got it. It was back and forth. You take one, I take the next. Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, I understand that. And, I think that my argument was that that's probably what they also were thinking is, man, we have to rely on half of our power here, our star power, to get us through this pay-per-view. And they were concerned that it wasn't going to work out long term. And obviously they decided to scrap it and go back to the old model of one pay-per-view, both brands on it. But it also, the argument against mine is that, well, it also allows more spots for more guys and gals to be noticed on a pay-per-view, where otherwise they would be maybe not included on the show if both brands are on it. There's only so many slots. So if you have a brand exclusive show, that means that you have more spots available for people that otherwise wouldn't have gotten on the show. And like you said, it does make it feel more important. It also does create that separate world of Raw and that separate world of SmackDown even further, which you and I are both fans of. And then when they do get together for the big four and they have some crossover, especially WrestleMania, when Raw and SmackDown stars cross paths, you're like, whoa, it feels like there are 2 separate wrestling organizations crossing paths. And that felt so cool. I mean, Goldberg and Lesnar was one example. I remember that whole program. You and I have talked about that many times, but to me, it should have been Austin versus Lesnar. That really felt like the program, especially the SmackDown when he came to SmackDown to get back his ATV from Brock Lesnar. When the whole SmackDown roster came out and Paul Heyman told them get Austin, and they all just stood aside out of respect. And Austin and Brock Lesnar went toe-to-toe. To me, like, that was the real match for WrestleMania. Obviously, with Austin retired at that point, that couldn't happen. But my point is, that is when it felt like 2 worlds colliding. Now it's just 2 worlds that are side by side, and there's a lot of overlap.
And that's the thing. I remember they were going on a trend. It was almost every WrestleMania, they would have 2 interpromotional matches. Like at WrestleMania 20, you had Lesnar versus Goldberg, and you had Kane versus Undertaker. And then at WrestleMania 21, you had Orton versus Taker, and you had Angle versus HBK. You always had those types of matches, and it felt so important. Like, I remember seeing like Shawn Michaels show up on SmackDown and he was dressed as the cameraman and he just starts attacking Kurt Angle from behind. That felt so important because Shawn Michaels was one of those guys that never changed brands. He was never, ever seen on SmackDown. So it felt like a big deal. Or when Kurt Angle got drafted to Monday Night Raw in 2005, it felt like a massive deal. And I think a large part of that is how important the brand exclusive, aka B-Level pay-per-views, felt back then. And nowadays, it's just like both brands are featured on them. And oftentimes, you're seeing matches that are inferior to those that you saw on Raw and SmackDown that week. And we're seeing it tonight. Like I said, like Big E and Bobby Lashley are fighting for the WWE Championship tonight. And they did so before the pay-per-view. But at the pay-per-view, they were in a 6-man tag team match. How are you supposed to sell me, or more so a casual fan, that the pay-per-view is more important when you're doing stuff like that? I really don't get it. I don't understand it. And I just don't get WWE's logic behind it, aside from the fact that because of the pre-sale to Peacock, there is no monetary incentive.
Yeah, there's very little incentive for WWE to ramp up their best product possible for Peacock itself, because they've got their money. I mean, it's like getting a guaranteed contract. Like, if I know I'm going to get $500,000 no matter what I do, why would I bust my ass if I know that no matter what I do, it's going to be $500,000? Now, maybe there's something in the contract with Peacock that says, it can't dip below this number of subscribers, or, maybe there's some kind of penalty that WWE has to pay back. I mean, I haven't seen the contract, but assuming that they just got their money and they're just running, and for the next 4 years, Peacock owns it, WWE doesn't have a lot of incentive to put out excellent content that, would draw Peacock subscribers to WWE, because WWE doesn't get any more money from any more subscribers. I mean, you could have 2 million more people sign up for Peacock for WWE, and WWE sees $0 from that. So yeah, I mean, they've got guaranteed money. They got their money and they took off, and more power to them. I mean, that good for WWE, good for stockholders, shareholders. That I don't blame WWE for doing that, but it just de-incentivizes them, I think, to make pay-per-views feel super important, because like we're talking about here, the B-level pay-per-views that are on 8 times a year don't feel that important anymore, especially when you create championship matches every single week. Every championship is on the line every single week. Essentially, that's what we're going to get to. I mean, we're already nearly there, where every championship is on the line every single damn week. It's so frustrating to see, because championships are why anybody should be there. I mean, if you're not trying to get a championship, as Austin says, what the hell are you doing here? And so anyway, this has been, just so interesting to talk about, because I don't know if I've never heard a podcast cover this, with B-level pay-per-views, and also our realization that only 3 of them are not gimmick-related names, which is ridiculous. I mean, I'm sure they'll add taglines. A lot of times they'll add taglines to pay-per-views, like, what was it? The greatest wrestling match ever, when Edge and Orton went at it.
You'll never see it coming.
Which actually was creative because of what actually happened at SummerSlam. That was a nice, sneaky thing to do. But they do add sometimes ridiculous taglines that are just so hokey.
The horror show?
Yeah, the horror show. Yeah, oh my God. And they had to revamp that so many times, because it was originally like the horror show at Extreme Rules. Then it was Extreme Rules, the horror show. Like, they didn't know what the hell they wanted to name it. I heard 5 iterations of it. But yeah, they had those silly taglines to it, and it seems as if they've backed off of that. Maybe it was just to create interest during the pandemic era. Who knows? But any other final thoughts here before we close things out?
No, I guess I would just say that after speaking about it, I wish that they would go back to having pay-per-views being as important as they used to be. But if they're just going to continue down this creative path, I would rather them just go to 4 pay-per-views a year.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. If WWE polled their audience, I really do wonder if WWE did put out a poll and they were going to use that to determine how many pay-per-views a year they're going to do. I still believe that most fans would want a pay-per-view every month, because they're like, oh, it's something to look forward to. Yeah, it doesn't feel as special, but it still feels, it's still an event. I still believe that we would be outvoted. Probably not in a landslide, but I don't know how many of us are left, honestly, that just are more of a traditional, want programs to feel important, want the matches to dictate the stipulations, not the other way around. I think that we're out there. I think we're a minority, unfortunately, as we're a minority in supporting the New Day and Big E's championship run. Every single time I hear him being cheered outside, or when he's in an arena, it makes me want to cry. So it's not Kofi Kingston bad, but it's pretty damn close. So anyway, all right. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Before we go, though, of course, anybody that wants to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Oh, Twitter, it's easy. ADeMarco25. You can catch me on there anytime. Awesome.
And Anthony also covers our rivalries. That drops every single Friday. So check that out if you haven't already. And this has been great. So I'm sure we'll be back next week with another one of your brilliant ideas for the What If show. So
yeah, man. Looking forward to it.
All right. Have a good night.
Take care.